Welcome to the week ahead. My name is Ibrahim from the AWANI News Desk.
I'm Hafiz Mazuki from the AWANI studio.
So there's plenty to unpack this week. We'll start off with Singapore because their Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat will step aside as the leader of the so-called fourth generation of the People's Action Party or PAP leadership team. This announcement or shock announcement was announced on Thursday.
And of course, it's a very interesting part on what he actually said, Ibrahim, because he said, and I quote him directly, he said, after careful deliberation and discussions with my family, I have decided to step aside as leader of the 4G. And 4G here, of course, referring to the fourth generation team. And this is done so that a younger leader who will have a longer runway can take over. Of course, he was making reference to the previous three Prime Ministers of Singapore, which when they first ascend the so-called position, they were much younger, and I think it's admirable for Heng Swee Keat to actually do that, Ibrahim, because he is basically handpicked, he's named, he's set to be Lee Hsien Loong's successor, but now he has willingly sent a letter to the PM, willingly and publicly saying that he is stepping down for the greater good of the country. And I think there's nothing more admirable than that in a politician.
The thing about Singapore is that they are telegraphing the leadership of that republic for a long time. This has been going on for quite a bit, ever since Lee Kuan Yew took over back in the 60s. Goh Chok Tong was telegraphed to be the next leader of Singapore, and then when Goh Chok Tong took over, it was clear that Lee Hsien Loong was going to be the next Prime Minister. This very orderly transition of power is actually critical for, or it's a hallmark actually, for the entire PAP administration of Singapore. And of course, we all know that PAP has been ruling Singapore since its independence and since its Malaysian ejection back in 1967. So the question now is, what's next? We have had some names being bandied about, and I don't know whether these names will spring into action in the near future. But Hafiz, what do you think? Who do you think is in the so-called front running to become the next Prime Minister?
All right, if we look at how Heng Swee Keat assumed the leadership, or so-called the next in line, I shall say, it's very orderly, Ibrahim. Actually, is unlike what we see here in our country. It's all done with processes. So basically, he was first named as the Secretary General of the PAP, and he was designated as first among equals from the 4G team. And you can see the so-called designated deputy for Heng Swee Keat is Chan Chun Sing, which is also part of, I would say, the cohort. And of course, if we were to say, if we speak to analysts and just those who are observing Singaporean politics from the other side and not from Singapore itself, Chan Chun Sing is seen as the so-called next in line. But of course, with the statement made by the entire 4G team, I believe there's more than 20 of these leaders stating that they will go through their due process to elect or pick the next leader. Because the way they say it, and I remember one of their ministers said this, that they're not picking a boss, but they're picking a captain of a team that will lead Singapore into the so-called next phase, or rather the post-COVID era. And this is very interesting of how orderly they do things. Everything goes on according to plan, I shall say.
You see, I always say that Singapore is a massive corporation with 5 million employees and with some contractors coming in mostly from the People's Republic of China. That's how I view it. And of course, that statement has particularly offended some of my Singaporean friends, but actually that's how it is, right? And while, before we jump ahead, Heng Swee Keat will remain as the coordinating minister of finance at the cabinet, but there will be some cabinet reshuffle that will take place in about 2 weeks' time. But within the next week, we should be seeing some signals. Like I said again, the whole notion of telegraphing their movement ahead, that's going to take place very soon.
Just chiming in here, Ibrahim, of course, we can, in 2 weeks' time, you said, yes, the very important cabinet reshuffle, right? That will indicate who Lee Hsien Loong is thinking, or rather where the thinking is at for the 4G team, who will be next in line to replace or to succeed Lee Hsien Loong.
All right, coming up also is the big news from Grab because we all know this is one of the most valuable Southeast Asian company, and Grab is set for the largest merger between a private business and a blank check vehicle in a deal that will value SoftBank-backed technology group at about 35 billion US dollars. Grab, whose offerings we all are familiar with, include ride-hailing and financial services and food delivery, could finalize an agreement to list in New York via one of Altimeter Capital's special purpose acquisition companies, or SPAC, as soon as this week. Now, this is reported by the Financial Times and is quoting 3 people with direct knowledge of the situation. The news has been well covered by a few other entities around the world, including that of Astro AWANI. Hafiz, what do you think? Do you think this merger is going to be a big deal for all of us?
Definitely, Ibrahim. I mean, when I saw the news, I knew that the merger would be one of the US investment firms to Altimeter Growth SPACs, and would come after Grab's board agreed to a preliminary deal last month. And this is very important, Ibrahim, because I would say when we discussed this earlier, there are not many Southeast Asian companies listing actually in NYSE, and you and I both know that I guess the most famous one is probably Shopee's parent, who is actually listed in NYSE, and this kind of agreement has been held up as a very crucial first test for the Southeast Asian. So I would say we can call Grab a unicorn that basically are preparing to go public this year. And we all know, founded in 2012, Grab offers access to a regional consumer market of more than 600 million people across countries, not just Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and of course, we all know the region of Southeast Asia.
So the big question now that we need to ask each other is, of course, why list on the NASDAQ? Why list on the New York Stock Exchange? Why not, list in this part of the world, including that of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange or Singapore? I wouldn't say, or that, listing in Malaysia has never been on the horizon, but not many people would like to talk about Grab having its origins in Malaysia, but they do have their origins in Malaysia. So perhaps one of the reasons why they want to list in New York is because they want to tap into a broader list of investors. They want to look at the kind of investors that might be interested in tapping into the Southeast Asian market, which you have mentioned rightfully just now, Hafiz, 600 million. It's actually 655 million to count to date, but of course, including foreign workers and expats, we're looking at the 700 million market here in Malaysia. So when they talk about talking to investors, there's not many investors that want to reach that kind of appetite that is normally seen by Grab, or Grab wants to get that kind of investors. If you look at this particular merger deal, we are looking at the valuation being at 35 billion, but how did it get to $35 billion? It's because of this particular line that I want to highlight, which talks about Altimeter taking about 1.2 billion direct cash injection into this merger acquisition, of which this 1.2 billion is part of a bigger $2.5 billion in what it is called a private investment in public equity. This is a financing that is often raised in conjunction with SPAC. So would investors have that kind of pocket or deep pockets to actually finance this growth? Grab does not want to talk to any other investors at the lower levels any longer. They have reached that kind of status where, if you're not into your billions, perhaps you might not be the right investors for us. And that's why perhaps listing in Southeast Asia or Hong Kong might not be a path forward for Grab. So in the week to come, we're looking at Grab perhaps announcing their merger listing in New York, and this would be perhaps one of the biggest listings for the year, and of course will be one of the biggest listing coming in from Southeast Asia, and more so it becomes a highlight of the day because this is one of the biggest Southeast Asian companies that will be listing on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. We don't know which one yet for now. Let's move on to some local business news, and that the big news of round 2 have emerged from Axiata and Telenor, because a few days ago Axiata and Telenor has announced that they are in advanced discussions to merge Celcom and Digi, their 2 subsidiary companies, with definitive agreements expected to be signed in the months to come, in this quarter at least, in the second quarter of this year. and what it is expected to be fully completed by year end of next year, or at least the first quarter of next year. This is, of course, talking about a situation where they have entered a new round of agreement, a new round of conversation of merger, one that was seen in 2019 and was terminated in November 2019. And one of the bigger reasons then was, quote unquote, it blamed complexity as an issue. And because of that, the merger could not go through during that time. But of course,
Ibrahim, just chiming in here. I mean, you've raised a very important point, because you said that this was discussed before. So what is different this time around? What's the thing that pushes it or tips it over?
I think not many people want to say this, but I'll say this anyway. One of the bigger problems then was on the control of shares by the merger of then Telenor and Axiata, because during that point in time, it was about a split down the middle 50-50 merger. And because of that, there's a lot of Malaysians that say that this kind of agreement might not be of Malaysia's benefit, and it doesn't sit well with that. That's why the only thing that we can see new is in the amount of shares that is being distributed in this round 2 kind of agreement, because DG will issue new shares to Axiata, such that Axiata and Telenor, which each have 33.1% in the merged entity, which is currently going to be called Celcom DG Berhad, or CDB, now we know the name, and stay listed. So I would assume that Axiata and DG would delist and combine the listing to become CDB Berhad or something along the lines. And Axiata will receive 1.7 billion ringgit and 300 million ringgit cash coming in from DG and Telenor respectively. So the deal is, of course, subject to shareholders and regulatory approvals, of which both parties say there is no certainty. Again, there is no certainty that this will result in any form of merger. But Hafiz, does that answer your question? Do you think that this addressed some of the concerns that came about from the first round of merger problems that was terminated back in November 2019?
Well, I guess it's something that only Axiata, or rather Celcom and DG, would be able to answer that question. But what I think is interesting about this, Ibrahim, because I think we all know that the telecommunications landscape in Malaysia is relatively small in terms of the number of companies that are involved. It is always the usual suspects, right? Maxis, of course, is there. U-Mobile is there. And Celcom and DG are very well-known brands. And it is to my understanding that, in fact, even after the merger, if the merger were to happen, it's set to merge. If the merger, once the merger is done, Celcom and DG will still exist as separate brands, in fact. If you're a user of Celcom, if you're a user of DG, you're not changing it to a Celcom DG line per se. And I would say this is interesting because just the combined might of these both companies is really taking over more than 50% of the local market.
Talking about leadership, Axiata will nominate its initial chairman to be Dato' Izzaddin Idris and the CEO to be Idham Nawawi, the current chairman and CEO of Axiata Berhad as well as Celcom respectively. Telenor will appoint the deputy chairman, Jürgen Rostrup, and deputy CEO, Elben Murti. Elben, of course, is the current DG CEO. There will be no forced retrenchments according to them, though voluntary separation schemes may be offered, and that's key. We're talking tens and thousands of people that might be, well, retrenched, okay? And of course, Celcom and DG brands will remain. They will also talk about being the biggest telco company in the country. Currently, they have a combined market share of 55%, so that puts them on top of Maxis, which has currently about 33%. So are you interested of having a more consolidated telco industry, but at the same time having lesser players to choose from? Is that the way forward? Do you think that's a good idea, Hafiz?
Well, when we talk about this, we always talk about the issue of monopoly, right? The less the companies they are in a space, the easier for them to control prices and everything. The more companies there are, the more players there are, the more competitors there are, it is actually better for the consumers, because you would race ahead to see who will actually be able to offer the best prices. But I understand under current circumstances with the pandemic, etc., it is more logical, it makes sense to actually consolidate.
Yeah.
And this is basically the idea, I believe, that they built on.
Yes, and unlike most sectors, one would argue that that the telco sector is going to be facing intensive pressure coming in from the cost capital structure, and perhaps amalgamating and consolidating in this sector might be a good thing because it's not cheap building telco towers, and it's not cheap investing in the billions for 5G infrastructure development. And if you have bigger players consolidating and you have capital being injected together to make it massive and behemoth, then it becomes a realistic argument for telcos to merge, because when they combine their capital resources, they can actually build better network. I mean, in Bukit Jalil, we don't have good Celcom network. That's something that we need to talk about as well. But that is perhaps something that they can address when they combine. Logic would dictate that users can enjoy the tower benefits of both Celcom and Digi, and perhaps this could be launching into another kind of business, perhaps a vertical business on entertainment, on education, who knows. Maxis has already talked about being an entertainment kind of vertical being created out of it. So competition is intense, but perhaps that's the way forward for this sector. So there's a lot of things that's going to be announced in the week ahead for Celcom and Digi. So be tuned or stay tuned to keep out on those announcements. We'll carry all those announcements on this channel. We are, of course, actively trying to get Axiata executives to come on the show as well to talk about this potential merger that might not happen with no definitive structure taking place. But they are, of course, set to take this forward. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about the phase 2 vaccination programs that is taking place in Malaysia next week. Welcome back to The Week Ahead. My name is Ibrahim. I have with me Hafiz Marzuki in the studio. Hafiz, as you know, we will start our Phase 2 National COVID-19 Vaccination Program specifically on April 19th, but they're slowly introducing it next week across various states. In fact, 8 states in Malaysia. And of course, if you're a senior citizen, which Hafiz clearly you are not, an individual who has chronic diseases or with disability, perhaps I don't know of any chronic disability that you have, I don't know, but these kind of groups will be amongst those registered for the COVID-19 Phase 2 vaccination program. My mother is one of them. My mother is suffering from a host of comorbidities as well as some chronic diseases, and she is, of course, above 70 years old. So perhaps that's she might be listing the Phase 2 vaccination programs. Hafiz?
Of course, that's the interesting part, right? Phase 2 vaccination, because basically it's entering into the mass public side of it. Because I'm sure there are more families in Malaysia who has an elderly compared to families who actually have a frontliner. And of course, Ibrahim, when we talk about vaccination, there's an ongoing discussion or public discourse about what to get, which vaccine to get, etc., etc. We still maintain, and when I say we here, I'm referring, of course, to the government of Malaysia, that vaccination that has been approved by the NPRA is safe to be used by the public. So, I mean, the public should not be worried about these vaccine side effects. And of course, other thing that is interesting to note is, of course, the deliberation on the usage of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Of course, in the past week, we've also seen a report by the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, which stated about the rare blood clots that found in some, or rather a very small percentage group of people injected with or inoculated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. The coordinating minister in charge of the national COVID-19 immunization program, Khairi Jamaluddin, has said that the committee will actually deliberate the issue. They will make sure that everything, safety is of paramount before introducing the vaccine for the usage of the public. Of course, he was referring to the AstraZeneca vaccines arriving in May, actually, which is probably very smack right in the middle of the Ramadan month.
Okay, so if you want to know how the vaccine Phase 2 rollout is going to be impacting you, Phase 2 will begin on 19th April in 8 states, namely Kedah, Pahang, Penang, Melaka, Sabah, Sarawak, Terengganu and Labuan. Other states, including the more populous states of Johor, and Selangor will commence a few days later and eventually will reach Wilayah Persekutuan Kuala Lumpur, the federal territories, a few days after that. What you need to do now is to check your MySejahtera account, make sure that you are toggling the push notification. Users who are eligible to be vaccinated in phase 2 will be notified via MySejahtera at least 2 weeks in advance. So imagine if you're going to be vaccinated on April 19th, perhaps now might be a good time to double check your MySejahtera app and see if you're eligible. And this is followed up, of course, by a phone call and an SMS reminder 3 days prior. And as mentioned by Khairi Jamaluddin, users will be given the option to accept or decline the vaccination via MySejahtera. I'm not too sure why anyone would decline the vaccination. Please, it's your civic duty and be a good citizen to accept the vaccination. You've already signed up on MySejahtera after all, and you've already been shortlisted to accept the vaccination. So take it, right? That's the most important thing that you can do for your own self as well as for the people around you. Take the vaccination. One more news that needs to be talked about is the cabotage reversal policy. We've covered it extensively on Consider This as well as on my show, Notepad. We've had the executive or the managing editor of Choya Cinca on my show. We've had Seri talking about the cabotage policy on my show. And it seems like there's going to be some reversal to the reversal policy that might take place next week. Hafiz, what do you think? You've had the MDEC chairman on Consider This as well. That's quite interesting.
Yes, exactly. The MDEC chairman, Dr. Rais Hussein Muhammad Arif, was in, and he was talking about the need for all the stakeholders to actually sit together, including the involved ministries. Of course, the Transport Ministry, etc., should be to discuss what is the most pragmatic approach, because we don't want the country to lose out. In general, just because of this reversal. I would say it's a U-turn or a roundabout. I'm not sure.
It's a roundabout plus half, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. So, and I remember one of his quotes, Rais actually said that this is not rocket science. It can be discussed. You can find what is good for the nation. So all parties are encouraged to sit down, put aside any emotions, and just discuss it objectively to ensure that whatever policy change or whatever policy decisions to be made, it will benefit Malaysia as a whole. Right.
Okay, so the cabinet will sit for a meeting on Wednesday, so do look out for that. Perhaps Wednesday night or even Thursday, some announcements on this might take place. But do also expect some executive decisions coming from the Prime Minister himself that might come in earlier, if anything at all, when it comes to the cabotage reversal policy. Meanwhile, before we end the show, there are some conversations that need to be talked about in the annual general meetings that might take place next week. On the 14th of April, we have Carlsberg and MMHE hosting their AGMs. Maybank and CIMB will host their AGMs on the 15th of April. Hafiz, have you ever been to an AGM, Hafiz?
Yes, actually, I have been. Actually, in fact, I believe many years back it was the Bank Rakyat's AGM, and it's interesting to see the financial report and what the management came up to say. And of course, I don't have a financial background like you, so it is interesting to pick up on these new terms and just basically understand where in my case it was a bank is heading. And it's good to actually expose yourself to this sort of information, because it helps you in a way to become a better user per se, because you kind of know what's going on with basically what you invest in.
There's a joke. There's a lot of these retail investors that go there just for the door gifts, and the door gifts at AGMs can be one hell of a gift.
Of course, there are apparently allowances as well.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, that's it for this particular episode of The Week Ahead. My name is Ibrahim.
And I'm Hafiz Mazuki, signing off for the evening.